The early 1960s were the stuff of automobile design legends, from the big cubic inch engines all the way to even a front-wheel drive Oldsmobile. The word normal was not in car designers' vocabulary, as they increasingly pushed the boundaries of automotive technology, some of which having better success than others. And one such car that stretched the boundaries of design was not from the big three of Ford, Chevy, or Chrysler, but from an American company of the era that is more known for its cars of the 50s rather than the 1960s. A car whose design meant to break the luxury sports car mold, and while also being one of the fastest production cars of the day. Yet it failed to gain the notoriety that it deserved. And today we will be talking about the curious and somewhat tragic story of the Studebaker Avanti. The life of the Avanti began back in 1852 when the Studebaker brothers founded the Studebaker Company and built carriages and wagons for nearly 4 decades, until breaking into the automotive business at the turn of the 20th century. Fast forward about 60 years, and the company had been struggling to keep up with the big three after the war, due to smaller production facilities and an overall lack of popular cars. And while they did merge with another car manufacturer, who was Packard, Studebaker still needed a new path to bring the company back to its original success decades before. In January of 1961, the Studebaker-Packard Corporation appointed 41-year-old Sherwood H. Egbert. His task was to strengthen the company's position in the automobile business, and so on a business trip to California, Egbert bought every single automotive magazine that he could find at the Chicago O'Hare Airport and began sketching and creating his new vision for a new Studebaker, and attempted to challenge Ford's Thunderbird in his design. Upon returning from his trip, he immediately sought the help of famed designer Raymond Loewy. Loewy had been a designer at Studebaker before, but he was amazed at how well Egbert's sketches were made, saying, "I did not know the man, but I read through him from the sketches that he handed to me. I knew that Egbert had a natural flair for design, and I knew that I was working for a man whom I could respect for his good taste." In less than a month, Loewy gathered a team of designers to begin working on and creating a 1/8 clay scale model that would be called the X-SHE, which would become the Avanti. And shortly after the final designs were made, and plans were set to unveil this new car at the 1962 New York Auto Show. And the car would be named the Avanti, which is Italian for the word forward. And this car was to be released to the public as the first ever mass-produced fiberglass body 4-seat American car. The body of the car had a very Coke bottle waist that forms at the base of a very thin roof section with a large rear window that is framed with a built-in roll bar. The wildest styling feature of this new Avanti was the razor-edged front fenders that swept back into the curved rear before rolling into the rounded back of the car. A conventional grille was also thrown out in favor of an air scoop under a thin bumper that led to 2 headlights set inside the fenders before leading to an asymmetrical hump in the hood that runs into a pretty laid-back windshield. The Avanti looked like nothing else on the road, and especially nothing else that was coming out of any other American manufacturer. And what sat under the hood was also a major piece of the puzzle for this new groundbreaking Avanti. Studebaker opted to use the sturdy 289 cubic inch jet thrust V8 that would be standard in the base R1 model Avanti. This Studebaker mill was a 3.56-inch bore and a 3.63-inch stroke that, when matched with the appropriate cam, 4-barrel carburetor, and dual exhaust, would be good for about 240 horsepower. This 289 was not to be confused with the Ford 289 small block. While they did have the same effective displacement, the Studebaker engine utilized a much longer stroke and smaller bore, and it was almost 150 pounds heavier as well. But there was more to the Avanti than just the R1. The R1 was a pretty respectable small cube motor for the day, but there was a more powerful performance option that was called the R2. This was a bored-out Studebaker 289 V8 that was now effectively 304 cubic inches, that was also centrifugally supercharged by Andy Granatelli and Paxton to make 290 horsepower. And there was the even more mythical Studebaker Avanti R3s, which would be supercharged as well, and these ones would be turned up and make 335 horsepower. But apparently, only around 9 of these cars were ever made. Nonetheless, though, these supercharged versions put out major power for a small cubic inch V8 back in the early 60s. Behind these engines was either a 3-speed automatic or a 4-speed manual transmission that would put the power down through an optional twin-traction limited-slip rear diff. Combine all of this and the Avanti could throw out a 0 to 60 time of 7 to 8 seconds, depending on trim, and a factory top speed of around 120. USAC also tested the Avanti R3, the very special rare version that had 335 horsepower, at Daytona, and with that car, they were able to clock 153.48 miles per hour on the track. And to make it even better, Granatelli would then take another R3 to Bonneville in 1962 and set not one, but 29 land speed records, and travel faster than any other stock American car had before, with a flying mile time of almost 170. Not bad for a car that never had time to be put into a wind tunnel. Due to the Avanti's lightweight fiberglass body, though, they had to design the chassis specifically to be strong enough to counteract the body itself not being super structurally sound on its own. They borrowed the frame from a Studebaker Lark convertible and shortened it, and then gave it an A-arm front suspension with coil springs up front and a leaf spring rear end design out the back. The Avanti was also given front and rear sway bars and rear radius rods for superior handling over the base Lark chassis. Even with this reinforcing of the frame, the Avanti still came in at just under 3,100 pounds, which was almost 1,200 pounds lighter than its supposed Ford T-Bird competitor. And to complete the lightweight Studebaker car, they gave the Avanti another mass production first, and that was caliper-style disc brakes in the front of the car standard to replace a more common drum brake setup of the early 60s. Inside, the Avanti was a symbol of class and sportiness. 4 slim vinyl bucket seats were molded into an interior filled with crash padding and an aircraft-inspired cockpit that separated it from other cars in its class. When the car was first introduced, the Avanti received rave reviews, and to Studebaker's relief, a lot of orders rolled in immediately, as the Avanti seemed to outclass even the Corvette in some people's minds, as it offered similar performance with the versatility of a 4-seat car, kind of like the Thunderbird. This is the niche that Ford hit perfectly 2 years later with the Mustang, and that Chevy followed with the Camaro in 1967. Unfortunately for Studebaker, while they were rushing to get the car to market, they failed to set up the supply chain to fill the demand that unfortunately garnered significant media attention for them in a negative light. A major issue that they had was that the fiberglass bodies were of poor quality from the molded fiberglass company, which also coincidentally made the Chevy Corvette body. This forced Studebaker to overhaul their fiberglass production solutions mid-production. But the damage had already been done, as many customers who ordered an Avanti canceled as the excitement soured from production delays, and they chose to go ahead and buy other cars that were in stock and without these issues, like the Corvette, even though it had 2 less seats. And to make matters worse, word came out that Studebaker was holding on by a shoestring budget, and they could fold at any moment. And that would eventually happen in December of 1963, when the South Bend manufacturing plant shut its doors after the last 1964 Avanti rolled off the production line. Egbert had made plans of selling 20,000 Avantis in 1962, but in all, 3,832 Avantis would have been made for the 1963 model year, and a mere 809 were classified as 1964 model year cars. And the date of the sale was the only way to classify a 64 Avanti for sure, but they also did have a square headlight as opposed to the round headlight on the 63 cars. But thankfully for the Avanti, the doors closing at Studebaker would not mean its final goodbye, as it was rescued by then two successful Studebaker dealers, Nate Altman and Leo Newman, who bought all the rights to the car and transformed it by creating the Avanti Motor Corporation. They would continue to hand-build the car for years as the Avanti II, which was powered by a small block Chevy, and would be given even more options to customers wanting a more personal touch and yet some more modern stuff inside of the classic body style. Through the years, a dynasty of various successors would purchase the Avanti Corp and continue to make improvements and modified variants of the Avanti all the way up through 2006, keeping the name alive for nearly half a century after Studebaker went bust. But they were never great sellers, and as one could imagine, it was very difficult to turn a profitable automotive business on such a niche car, which was where the story of the Avanti itself fades away into obscurity. We don't often hear much about the Avanti or even the wicked Avanti R2 and R3 cars. And could it be because it was part of an oddball automotive company? Could it be because of the era's bad press of Studebaker itself and the Avanti production? Or maybe was it simply because this was such a wildly different looking design that was lightning in a bottle, and it was to be relegated as a niche character-like car meant for a very specific enthusiast who wanted something different? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. I, for one, will always remember the Studebaker Avanti as a truly unique car in the automotive world, and it also happened to be my grandfather's favorite car. So bringing this car and others to light is one of the main reasons that I do this channel in itself. And thank you all for watching yet another episode of our Rare Cars documentary series. If you enjoyed this video, we would greatly appreciate it if you could drop a like and also share this video with other enthusiasts. Also, please make sure that you are subscribed to the Rare Cars YouTube channel and smash that notification bell for more documentary style videos just like this on the world's most interesting cars. Until next time, enthusiasts.